This week I'll show you how I set up my a7 III for cinematic filming. The a7 III is an absolute powerhouse, not only for photography, but also videography. But there are a few settings you need to change to get the best out of the camera. So I'm going to quickly show you how I set up my camera to get that nice cinematic looking footage. To shoot video, you need to be in the movie mode. So if you switch the mode dial on the top to the movie setting, that is where you'll do all of your filming. In the menu, you'll be changing most of your settings in this tab 2. So that's the purple tab. First off is exposure mode. So select exposure mode. You want to be in manual exposure. You can see you have shutter priority, aperture priority, and program auto. Keep this in manual mode. This means that you take complete control of all of the settings. For the best quality, I keep my file format in 4K. And that's XAVCS 4K. Then I change my record settings to 25p and 100m. This means it is at 100 megabits per second, and this is the highest data rate that you can record in the a7 III. If you're in the United States of America and you want to record in 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second, you need to change from PAL to NTSC. And to do this, you go to your 5th tab and then number 2 of 7 down to NTSC PAL selector. So you change this and it'll reboot your camera. It'll tell you that it's running on NTSC, and I'm not going to keep in this, I'm just going to show you what it is. So I'm not going to format my SD card, I'm just going to take it out for the moment. So now if we go back to that menu, here you can see you can change it to 24p or 30p. I tend to shoot in 25p 100m. If you're not sure about NTSC and PAL, click on the eye in the corner. This will take you to a quick video explaining what these two different settings are. With S&Q settings, I tend not to do my slow motion and time lapses here. I use the new interval function for my time lapses, and then I change my XAVC setting to HD. If you shoot your slow-mo in S&Q, you get a lot lower data rate, and so you don't get the quality that this camera can offer. So this is where I shoot slow-mo. I make sure this setting is at 100p, 100m, so that's 100 frames per second and 100 bits per second. So now if I want to shoot in slow-mo, I quickly go to the 2nd tab, which is this purple tab. I select number 1 of 9 and I change XAVC from 4K to HD. And as you can see, it puts up 100 frames a second. And this is a quick and easy way of being able to change between 4K and the best slow-mo that this camera offers. So if we come down to proxy recording, if you edit with proxy files, you'll find the process will be a lot quicker and a lot easier, and you won't get your footage stuttering or skipping a beat, or you won't wait as long as you would if you just edited the H.264 files that this camera produces. I make all my proxy files once I've transferred the video files to my computer. If you're not sure how to make proxy files but want to because these original 4K files are slowing down your computer too much, leave a comment below, and if enough of you comment, I'll make a video on how to create good proxy files for fast video editing. One thing you might notice is some of these options have this little film strip next to them. That just means that these functions are just for shooting video. So these 3 top ones just relate to shooting video. So I set my autofocus drive speed to fast, my autofocus track sensitivity to responsive, and this seems to work really well. I then make sure that the touchscreen panel is on. So now we go over to Setup, page 2 of 7, and then go to Touch Operation, make sure that's on, and then make sure Touch Panel stroke pad is on Touch Panel only. With the Touch Panel settings, I make sure it's absolute precision and whole screen. So I'll set my focus area to flexible spot or expanded flexible spot. And now what I can do with the touchpad enabled is I can touch wherever I want my focus to be. So very quickly with autofocus constant and this, I can very quickly shift my focus from one place to another. I quickly accessed focus area there with this center button on the dial. I'll show you how I set up my custom buttons in a little while. So now back to tab 2, page 2 of 9. Obviously you want to record audio. I have my audio recording level on, and then the audio recording level. This differs depending on what microphone I'm going to use. If I have the Video Micro Pro, I'll set this between 6 and 8. If I have the NTG3 that I use normally, I'll have this set to 1. If I'm not using a microphone at all and I'm just using the inbuilt microphones in the a7 III, I'll set the audio recording level to 16. The next option is audio level display. This is great and I have this on all the time. What this is these little bars here. So if I turn up my audio recording level to 16, and this is where I'd have it if I didn't have a microphone on, now I'm talking, you can see those bars moving. It's a visual representation to show you when there's not enough audio or there's too much audio. On the next page, I don't worry too much about any of these. I have movie with shutter on. This basically means when I'm in the movie mode, when I press the normal shutter button, it'll start recording film. And this is great if you have a wireless remote shutter or a wired remote shutter. When you press that shutter button, it'll start recording video. On page 4, I make sure release without lens is enabled. This just means if I'm using any manual lenses that don't have any electronic connections, I can still use them and the camera will function as normal. Obviously there won't be any connection to the lens and you won't be able to control aperture from the camera, but with a manual focus lens, you'll have your aperture dial on the lens. With steady shot, I have this on, and if I'm shooting with an autofocus lens, I'll have this set to auto. If I'm shooting with a manual focus lens, I'll have this set to whatever the focal length is. So say for instance, I had my 24mm manual focus lens on the camera, this is how I'd set it up. But I have an autofocusing lens on there now, so I'll keep this on auto. With steady shot, I do keep this on. Some people don't, but I prefer it on, especially if I'm shooting handheld or I'm using a monopod. Some people turn this off when filming with a gimbal, but I keep it on just to get rid of that tiny little bit of jitter that you sometimes get when the motors and the camera aren't balanced perfectly. With zoom, I don't worry about that too much. So then on to page 6. With Find a Monitor, I set this to Monitor Manual. I'll set a custom button where I switch between the two, but this means that if I go in front of the eyepiece, it doesn't change from monitor to the finder. This is especially important when you're using the camera on a gimbal. Sometimes part of the gimbal will get in the way of this sensor up here and it'll turn the monitor off. So I have it on Monitor Manual. Now we're on to zebra settings. I have these on and I set them to 100 plus. With the grid line, I have this on the rule of thirds grid. This is just a gentle reminder. So if you're shooting something and you're in a real rush, this will just remind you of where to put your subject or where to put different things in the frame to make it more aesthetically pleasing. You don't always have to follow the rule of thirds, but this is just a gentle reminder. If you're not sure what the rule of thirds are, click in the eye in the corner. This will take you to another of my videos. The next thing I'm going to change are the custom keys, and this is where you can really set up the camera to how you want it. Again, we find this little film strip. That just means that this custom key next to the film strip are the custom keys when I'm in my movie mode. So the first one is the control wheel. That's this wheel on the back, and I set that to ISO. This means that I can control my ISO really quickly. I can control my shutter speed on this dial here and my aperture on the front dial. The custom button 1 is white balance, and that's this one up on the shoulder next to the shutter button. I've had a lot of cameras before and they've all had the white balance button on the top of the shoulder there. This is something I'm used to. You might like it somewhere else, but this is how I like to shoot. The next button is custom button 2, and that's next to custom button 1, and I've set that to picture profile. Picture profiles are really important, and I'll talk about those a little bit later on. Our custom button 3 is this one over here. I set it to toggle between APS-C and full frame. Now this is a really useful function, and you can press this button and you can see I'll crop in and pull out. So in effect, if you have a prime lens on your camera, you can get 2 different focal lengths with the same prime lens. And also when you crop in, I'm in 4K, it says up there, so I can still shoot in 4K in crop mode and 4K in full frame mode. So you're not going to lose any detail. It'll still be a 4K file. So we'll go back in. The custom button 4, which is the rubbish bin button down here, I have this on autofocus manual focus control toggle. This just means if I'm shooting, I can get focus and then I can switch it to manual focus. Sometimes you might be filming something where you have things passing in front of the camera, and the autofocus might try and grab onto those things that are closer to the camera when they go through the focusing area. By switching it to manual focus, once you focus to the point that you want, this won't happen. This just means that focus point will stay exactly the same. So the rubbish bin toggles between autofocus and manual focus. So onto the custom key page 2, I set my multi-select center button to autofocus on, and that's this button here. I use the back button focus technique when taking photographs, so this is just a habit from that. My finger always goes to this point to focus, so I just keep it on that. Now the center button I changed to focus settings, and that's this button here. So if I'm shooting and I want to change the focus area or move the focus area in the square without using the touchpad, I can press on that so I can move it to where I want with a D-pad, but also if I roll this, it changes between the different focus areas. I normally use flexible spot or expandable flexible spot. So in effect, that center button then has two different functions. With my left button on this D-pad, I set that to peaking display select. This is basically a setting where it'll put a color on the parts of the image that it thinks are in focus. There are a few instances where the camera can get tricked with this, but if you want to learn more about focus peaking, click on the eye in the corner or the link in the description to another of my videos. With the right button, I set this to focus magnifier. So when you're in manual focus, press right on the D-pad, that'll bring up this square that you can move around. Find the place where you want to focus the camera, press the center button, and that'll punch in on that part of the image. Now I can use my focus dial to really tweak in that focus and get the focus point exactly where I want it. For the down button, I set this to find a monitor select. Earlier in the video, I turned this sensor on the viewfinder off. So now what I can do is if it's really bright and I can't see what's going on in the back of the camera, I just press down on my D-pad and that will switch to the viewfinder. Press down on it again and it'll switch back to the monitor on the back. With AEL button, I set this to audio record level. So you may have noticed me hitting this AEL button to get the audio record level up. I can quickly press the AEL button, change the levels to what I want, and then start recording. With the AF on button, I set this to center lock on autofocus. This center lock on autofocus is a really good function. As you can see, I'll get the fruit bowl into the center of the shot and then press the middle button on the back control wheel. Now what it'll do is track the fruit bowl. So basically when you put this on, select what's in the middle and then it'll track that object through the frame. If it comes closer to you, the focus will track forward, and if it goes away, it'll track backwards. This is a really quick way of switching on the track autofocus in the video mode. With the focus hold button, this refers to that button on the side of certain lenses. I don't have many lenses with this on, but if you do, what I tend to do is set this to center lock on autofocus as well. So you've got another option to have that tracking autofocus system in play. So when focusing, I tend to switch between this flexible spot square, so I can put the focus where I want it, and the center lock on autofocus. Next, we're going to go across to tab 5. That's this setup tab. With the monitor brightness, I'll change this to suit. When you're shooting in bright sunlight, you'll obviously need to change it to sunny weather. You can see that's gone really bright. You can also change it manually. If I'm shooting in really dark scenes or I'm shooting a low light event, I'll turn this right down to the bottom. The only other setting that I'll change is record media settings. I'll have everything on, I'll have it as standard, and I'll change auto switch media to on. Then I'll have 2 SD cards in the camera, so if one fills up, it'll carry on recording onto the second SD card. Now you're probably wondering about what picture profiles I use and when. I'm quite lazy when it comes to color correction, and I've got the Sony Pro Color Pack from Andrew Reed at EOS HD. I'm not sponsored by EOS HD, and I don't know Andrew Reed, but he's done a lot of work and he's built some really good picture profiles. This is a paid product, but it's well worth the small investment to get the best out of your camera. In this Pro Color pack, you have profiles that are ready to go right out of camera, and also you'll have profiles that you need to color correct. Now, I shoot video in two different ways. If I'm controlling the light and I know exactly what the exposure should be, I'll set the color profile in camera so I know I've got the footage coming out of camera and I don't need to do any color correction on that footage. If the image that I'm shooting has a really high dynamic range, I'll shoot in one of the S-Log profiles. Then I'll make color corrections and changes to the images afterwards to really bring the best out of that shot. So it all depends what you're filming and the conditions and the exposures that you're setting. Knowing how to change these and knowing what to shoot when comes with experience. And that's about it. To film cinematic footage, there's a lot more than just camera settings. You have things like pre-planning, working out what shots and angles you're going to take, how you're going to stabilize the camera, and obviously there's the audio aspect of filming. And on top of that, you've got editing, color correction, and a whole lot more. But if you get the settings right in camera when you're actually capturing the footage, you'll be well on your way to getting cinematic footage. If you set up your a7 III differently, leave a comment below. It'll be interesting to hear the different setups that different people have to shoot cinematic video footage. As always, if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And for weekly tutorials, hints and tips in photography and videography, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.